right, what's going on, you guys? Nick here with Nick Strength and Power. I've got a couple of interesting stories for you guys today. The first story that I've got for you guys today, a new physique update from Phil Heath, of all people. Just in time for the Olympia. And it's kind of crazy to think about. It's already been 4 years now since Phil Heath's comeback to the Olympia. That was 2020, and this is the 2024 Olympia. That 4 years, I feel like, went by like lightning fast the last time that we saw Phil on the Olympia stage. So this is Phil now 4 years removed from competing, and he's 44 years old in this video. And he'll actually be 45 in December. And he's still got it. I think what impressed me most about this video was when he showed his legs, how detailed and separated his legs still are when I think he has probably no intention of coming back and competing. Just the shape that he's still in. I mean, obviously the genetics that he has, you look at his upper body, just the 3D round arm, shoulders, chest. But the condition that he's in, when you look at his legs, the separation, the detail, this is a guy that's not prepping for anything. This is a guy that's not competing and hasn't competed in 4 years now. And I think that, obviously, this is one of those posts that got people talking again about a Phil Heath comeback. When anybody, a legend like Phil, and it happened with Kai a lot, when Kai would post an update where he still looks really impressive, this conversation of a comeback comes back up. And at this point, I don't think he wants to, and I don't think he needs to. And I really don't think he will, although I think he could. You know, another thing that I was thinking about that's kind of crazy is, if you guys remember Athleticon, when The Rock was supposed to do this new bodybuilding show called Athleticon, that was when we used to talk about maybe Phil is going to come back and do that show because of his relationship with Danny Garcia and The Rock. Maybe he was waiting to come back for that. We had that conversation before COVID. Phil lost the title in 2018 to Sean Roden. In 2019 was when we were having this conversation about Athleticon. Maybe Phil's going to come back to that. That was over 5 years ago now. I mean, it's crazy how fast that's gone by. And I do think that Phil probably is still young enough to make a comeback. I mean, there's guys competing right now that are older than 44, and there's guys that are close to 44 that are competing right now that are still placing really highly. And I think that also, realistically, this version of Phil's physique is probably a very low dose of something. As someone said in the comments here, probably just TRT, given Phil's crazy genetics. But I don't know. I mean, the reason that I'm pointing out that it's been so many years since we saw Phil compete in the 2020 Olympia is because in those 4 years, think about all the new talent that has risen to the top of the Olympia. Because at that 2020 Olympia, Phil placed third. And Hadi Chupin was fourth behind Phil. Hadi hadn't even won the Olympia yet. And in that top 10, there was no Nick Walker. There was no Samson Dauda. There was no Derek Lunsford. There was no Andrew Jacked. There was no Rafael Brandao. All these top guys that we talk about today weren't even really around yet as far as being top Olympians. And like I said, Hadi hadn't even won. He was fourth here. So I think the landscape has really changed even in the past 4 years since Phil's comeback. And I don't know how Phil would fare in this new era of bodybuilding with Samson, with Andrew. We've never seen Phil with Nick Walker. With your current Mr. Olympia, Derek Lunsford. I mean, I was looking back and rewatching that 2020 Mr. Olympia, and the top guys, that was the year Rami won, Brandon was in second, Phil was in third, Hadi in fourth, Bonac in fifth, Akeem Williams in sixth, Ian Valliere in seventh, Hunter Labrada in eighth, Dexter in ninth, and Justin Luis Rodriguez in 10th. A very, very different top 10 just 4 years ago. But let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Is there any possibility of a Phil Heath comeback? And is there any possibility of a successful Phil Heath comeback in this new kind of era of bodybuilding that we're in now? Now, next up in the news, the latest physique update from Hunter Labrada at 2 weeks out from the 2024 Mr. Olympia. Hunter Labrada, fresh off his win in Italy, looking for an improved placing this year. So to look back again, 2020 he was 8th. 2021, he was top 4, 4th place. 2022, he was 7th, so he went from 4th to 7th. And in 2023, he moved back up from 7th to 6th. So the question for this year is there any possibility that Hunter Labrada places higher than 6th at this year's Mr. Olympia? Now, personally, I think that top 5, so the guys that Hunter will have to beat, in no particular order, will definitely include Hottie, Derek, Sampson. So there's 3. I think Andrew Jack will be in there, and I think Nick Walker will be in there. So I think any of those 5 guys would be who Hunter has to beat to move into a top 5 position. And as good as he looks in this update, I think he got kind of a mixed reaction at his Italy showing. And maybe not the reaction that he expected as far as how he looked. And personally, I think if he looks the way he looked in Italy, I don't see him beating Andrew Jack. I don't see him beating Nick. I don't see him beating Sampson, let alone, Derek or Hottie. I think the more realistic battle for Hunter is in like that 6, 7, 8 kind of call out. And I think it's going to be like him, Rafael Brandao. I think maybe William Bonac will be in there. If Beirut makes it to the Olympia, I think he'll be kind of in that range. I think that Mo Fuda has a shot at being in that conversation for one of those like 6 through 10 spots. But let me know in the comments below where you think Hunter Labrada is going to place at this year's Mr. Olympia. Now, next up in the news, we got a new physique update from Carlos Thomas Jr. I think a lot of people have been eagerly awaiting Carlos's next show. He still hasn't announced that. And there were a couple of shows earlier this year that I believe he intended on doing, but for whatever reason, I think one of them was health issues with his stomach. But the New York Pro was the big one that we didn't get to see him do. And I think that Carlos is kind of flying under the radar right now, but he's one of those guys that I would put in that same category as a good Vito, as a Neckzilla, as a Michael Krizo, even though Michael Krizo's now been to the Olympia several times now and kind of proven himself a little bit more. But all of these guys we talked about before we ever even saw them on an IFBB Pro stage. We talked about Carlos as an amateur. We talked about Good Vito as an amateur. We talked about Krizo in the other IFBB. And we talked about Neckzilla in the other IFBB before we ever saw him compete in this IFBB. And we have seen Carlos compete in this IFBB, but similar to Neckzilla, I don't think we saw him at 100% yet. We didn't see him with perfect conditioning yet. But physique-wise, the guy's an absolute freak. His legs are insane. His arms are insane. He's a shorter guy, but he's got so much muscle on his frame. I think if he were in incredible condition, he would be at the level of a Derek or a Hottie. He has the muscle and he has the physique to be one of those shorter guys in open that's just super, super dominant if he just ever brings that crazy condition. So this update, we haven't really seen much update from him in a while, but just kind of a reminder that Carlos is still here, and I think a lot of us are still eagerly awaiting seeing him on stage again. But I do still have him in that category of this new generation of guys, Neckzilla, Good Vito, Krizo, these guys that could rise to the top that all kind of came about in the same couple year span. It's just that Carlos has been a little bit quieter than those guys. Now, next up in the news, I was so wrapped up in the shows this weekend between the Legion and the Tsunami show, just watching and covering those streams all day. I forgot to mention this in a video, but I did see this weekend that Stephane Matala announced that he was out of the 2024 Olympia. And the reason that he gives is he says it's just too difficult for him to make the weight cap in classic physique. And he feels like every time he preps for a classic show, it ruins his look because he just struggles so much with making that weight. So here's his statement, which he translated into English from French. And he says, throughout the year, I put a lot of energy into building muscle, which I then have to lose with great difficulty to keep within my weight limit. I've reached a point where it's literally impossible to lose weight without completely destroying my physique. You have to be humble and realistic. I've reached a stage where it's literally impossible to lose weight without destroying my physique. My body hasn't responded to preparation for several weeks, and I couldn't take any health risk. A few weeks ago, I took the decision to start my transition to a new category to avoid continuing to lose time, which we're assuming is open bodybuilding. For this reason, I won't be taking part in the Olympia this year, and I'm going to concentrate on the work we've started to change categories. And he tags his coach, Patrick Tour. Now, I think Stephane obviously has a beautiful physique, And I've always kind of thought he's got a lot of muscle for a classic guy. I'm glad that he's saying here that he wants to take time to move to open and he doesn't want to take any risks with his health. And if it's really true that it's just impossible for him to make the weight cap, then really what choice does he have? Although I would have liked to see him on the classic Physique Olympia stage after not being able to see him last year. He was qualified. This year he's qualified. We're not going to see him this year. I would have just liked to see on the biggest stage of them all for classic, even if it's really hard for him to make the weight limit, where Stephane would have fell in the midst of the best classic guys in the world before he made the move to open. Because, yeah, we've seen him qualify for the Olympia twice, winning kind of obscure shows to get there. And we've seen all these crazy updates on Instagram, but we've never really seen him against the best of the best classic guys to know where he really stacked up. And I feel like that would have been cool to see before he goes to open and probably would have given him a little bit more hype going into open. Like with Keon, before Keon went to 212, Keon was one of the top guys at the Classic Olympia. I think people forget that. But at the same time, if he feels like it would have been a risk to his health, then I'm glad he didn't do it. And I'm curious to see what an open version of Stephane looks like because while I think he's kind of big for a classic guy, I think he's got a lot of muscle to put on to be competitive and open, even though he's got a beautiful physique. And hopefully he doesn't sacrifice too much of his shape in those crazy lines that he has in that pursuit of putting on size for open. That's kind of what I'm worried about with the transition to open. Now, the final story that I have for you guys today, we got kind of a little bit of an update from Andrew Jacked. He doesn't really show much going into a show like the Olympia. You get to see his legs a little bit here. And I felt like at the Texas Pro, the most noticeable improvements that Andrew had were to his lower body. He looked like he certainly put on size and improved the detail of his lower body, front and back. And I think that you get a little bit of a glimpse of that size in this update. So the question for Andrew this year is similar to the question for Hunter that I mentioned earlier in this video. Andrew was top 5 at the Olympia last year. So the question this year is, can he move up into the top 4? So who's likely to be in the top 4 this year? Last year, your top 4 was Derek winning, Hottie in 2nd, Sampson in 3rd, and Brandon Curry in 4th. We haven't talked a whole lot about Brandon Curry this year because we haven't really seen or heard much from him at all. And we are still assuming he's competing. We know he's no longer with his coach Abdullah, and we're not exactly sure who's coaching him for this year. I do think there's a chance that Andrew could push into that top 4 and maybe squeeze Brandon out. But I think that Nick Walker also has a real shot at that top 4. And I think Nick will probably be a bigger issue for Andrew than Brandon. But I personally think that that top 3 from last year, Derek, Hottie, Sampson, in no particular order, I think that's going to be the top 3 again this year. Because I think all those guys, those 3 guys are the best bodybuilders in the world right now. I think Sampson has proven that. He looks improved. Derek is your current Mr. Olympia. Hottie Chupin is your 2-time Arnold Classic champion, former Mr. Olympia, arguably the most consistently conditioned bodybuilder on the planet. And I think that if someone is able to come in and knock one of those 3 guys out of the top 3, they have to look out of this world spectacular, or one of those 3 guys has to be pretty off to get knocked out. Because if those 3 guys are on, I just don't see them being knocked out of the top 3. But Andrew is one of those guys that has a crazy enough physique. If he came in, kind of like what we say with Sampson, but if Andrew came in out of this world peeled, that's like that level of freak factor that I feel like could come in and maybe unsettle the top 3. But let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. We're getting very, very close, less than 2 weeks out from the Olympia now. What are your top 6 Olympia predictions? Comment down below. As always, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, click that bell notification icon, and as always, I love you guys, appreciate you guys. Nick Strength and Power signing out. All right, guys, don't forget to click that like button and subscribe to this channel if you enjoy the content. Also, check out my Instagram at NICKS&P. my Facebook page, which is simply Nick Strength and Power, my secondary YouTube channel, Nick Strength and Vlogs, for vlogs and bonus content that you will not see on this channel, and consider subscribing to my third YouTube channel, Nick Strength and Pokemon, which is all things Pokemon and trading card games, completely unrelated to this channel. So if you're into that, give that one a look. And all links to merchandise and social media will be in the description box below. If you guys want a Nick Strength and Power t-shirt, that will be in the Shopify link below. Have a great day.